CWPA Remote Professional Edition, where we take a look at water polo players and where they are today.
This woman was a member of the Cornell University Big Red Women's Water Polo Club team. After graduating in 2002 with a degree in hospitality business, she worked at high-end hotels in Washington, D.C. and London, England. And now, she is the Vice President of Team Marketing and Business Operations at the National Basketball Association. I'm so very pleased to be joined today by Nicole Freeman Womack. Nicole, thanks so much for appearing today on CWPA Remote.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here. So how and why did you end up choosing Cornell?
It's kind of funny because in high school, they had us do those Myers-Briggs career tests my junior year of high school. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but everything led in it to that I wanted to do business, but do something a little bit different in business. So hospitality management and hotel management was actually the direction I decided to go. And they had a little computer program where you plug in attributes of schools, and women's water polo and hotel management yielded two results, one of them being Cornell. So that became my reach school, and I was lucky enough to get in. So yeah, it was very random. I'd never even been east of Colorado before I went for orientation my freshman year. So,
well, that's certainly an interesting research way to get your university in your sights. So what was your very first practice like?
It was fun. I think I was very nervous because I didn't know what to expect. It was also my first time ever playing in an indoor pool, if you can imagine that. Mm-hmm. Because being from California, I just never done that before. And so I remember thinking, first of all, I walked in, and the pool at Cornell it's a normal sized pool. In high school in California, shout out to Marin County, where I grew up, in Marin Water Polo Club, but I used to play in a beautiful Olympic-sized outdoor pool. So I remember first off going to the pool going, okay, what's going to be going on here? And then luckily all the girls were very nice, but I was one of only a couple of freshmen. There were only 2 freshmen. And so it was a little bit intimidating because I was worried about impressing the upperclassmen. But it was fun. Everyone was nice. We got to work, and obviously it all went well.
Well, one of the things about going from outdoor to indoor on the plus side is you never have to worry about the sun in your eyes. You don't have to worry about the temperature, and you don't have to worry about the wind. So
yeah, the thing I found we were dealing with was the echo. Like that indoors it echoes versus outdoors it didn't have that. So that was actually one of the biggest adjustments. So
yeah, that's interesting. So how about your first game? Do you remember that?
I do remember my first game because it was interesting. Going to Cornell, my senior year in high school, I was predominantly a whole set and a whole D. And those positions, when I got to college, there were upperclassmen that were great at them. So the coach had me start, but I was starting on the perimeter, which I wasn't used to. And so we had done, some work on it in practice. But I remember in my first game, a girl was guarding me, and I realized that her hips were down, and so I turned her very whole set style and drove towards the goal. And that was kind of like my exciting moment when I was like, wait a second, this is a position that I wasn't necessarily used to, but I can still do things here. So it was fun. I didn't score the goal, but it started something that I could try at least in the next several games.
Well, do you remember your first goal?
I do remember my first goal, and it felt really good. It actually, similar situation. It did come on that where I turned someone on the perimeter, and then I drove towards the goal, and I passed it to Joyce, who was our whole set, and then she passed it back, and it was wet shot. But yeah, I do remember that actually.
Well, and what is your single best memory of your water polo career there?
That would have to be my senior year. When we took, I think we were fact checking this last night, myself and my teams, but I think we took 3rd in the division that year, and we beat Collegiate, which they were kind of like proximity wise in New York, like Cornell to Collegiate, like we didn't really have big rivals, but I feel like if you were picking one at the time, that would have been it. We were reasonably matched. They had beaten us the previous year. And so I remember we had worked really hard and went into that game, and everyone knew each other really well. I think that's one of the things about these divisions and the way things work is you get to know all the players extraordinarily well and all of their strengths and everything. And so we won that game. That was my best memory because I remember celebrating with everyone. It was kind of the culmination of my senior year, so and my Cornell water polo experience. So that would be the best memory.
And any disappointing events along the way?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, I just mentioned it, but when we had that loss my junior year, that was definitely disappointing. I also, one of the more disappointing things for me on a personal level was that my senior year in high school, I had actually hurt my rotator cuff a little bit, and it kind of reappeared in college. And so I remember I think it was my sophomore year of college, I was turning and someone hooked their arm and it tweaked my shoulder again. But it was so early in the season that I basically had to I started training my left hand more. So it ended up becoming like a big opportunity, but that was so frustrating in the moment because I was like, how am I gonna play if I can't use my right arm as much? It was one of those things as more of a fatigue injury. So that was something that was hard to deal with too.
Well, these things happen throughout careers, obviously, as you know, especially working in professional sport now. But I'd love to hear your reflections about your career at Cornell on the water polo team, and include, if you will, any amusing and or embarrassing situations that arose.
Yeah, sure. So speaking back to the fact I was from California, like hadn't really been to the East Coast. One more amusing thing that several of the Californians over the year that we dealt with was understanding that your hair will freeze when you're leaving the pool at night, right? I just wasn't like, this isn't a thing. You normally don't have to blow dry your hair and stuff like that before you leave. And having the right hat is very important in Ithaca at a certain time of year. So one of the more amusing things that happened to me that I can now laugh at is my freshman year. I didn't blow dry my hair. I needed to get back to my dorm to do some work, and I didn't have a great hat. My hair froze, and then when I went to touch it when I got into the dorm room, and it snapped. So some of my hair actually snapped off because it was so frozen. Didn't know that could happen. But it happened to multiple Californians over the years on the team who didn't. I should have shared the lesson I had learned, and I failed to do so a couple of times. So that was one of my more amusing things. But then other things I just remember are our road trips and traveling from to the different pools, and that experience with my teammates. And at the time it was all about Britney Spears. So listening to Britney Spears on the radio on road trips. And the camaraderie with the other girls is probably, it was a highlight of my time at Cornell. It was a great group of people, and we all got along really, really well together. So it was fun.
So before we get into your current situation, tell us a bit about your hotel stints in Washington and London.
Oh, yeah. So I graduated from college in 2002, which was significant if you were entering the hotel industry because September 11th was 2001. So my graduation year was that year. So it was a year where everyone was scrambling to figure out what they would do. I would imagine it's like what a lot of people are going through right now, actually, where companies aren't hiring. There are lots of freezes. So I was really, really lucky to have the opportunity to work at the Four Seasons, Washington, D.C. Went through their management program there, which my first stop on it was being a housekeeping manager. And I have to say it was one of those things where you don't necessarily realize how much goes into a product and creating a fantastic product. It was also a situation where straight out of school, 21 years old, 22 years old, I was managing a team of people. And so that was actually a circumstance where I had been captain of the team at Cornell. Before that all of the lessons I had of how to work with people, lead through gaining buy-in was huge in that situation, because those ladies, those housekeepers, had been doing that job for years, and I was coming in and hadn't had as much experience in it. I likened it a little bit to when I was captain at Cornell, and some of the players who came in behind me were much better than I was and had great experience. So learning those situations. But DC was a cool place to work. It's an amazing place to work. And I worked there during one of the election years. I worked there at the time where President Reagan's funeral happened. DC was just in the middle of all of it. And the Four Seasons Hotel in particular had, every head of state, every, celebrity would go there. So they're a phenomenal company to work for. And with them, I moved to London. They were awesome in transferring me over there. While I was in London, I enjoyed my time there, decided I didn't really want to work in hotels. So at the time, you could get a work visa, a points-based work visa, if you had basically hit a certain number of marks, like had a degree, had a certain number of years of work experience, and stayed there to work for an Irish hotel company, which I loved also, managing their quality assurance and basically creating service and designing service for the hotel. Again, great experience. And in London was actually when I got to start playing water polo again. So that was pretty cool. One thing about our sport is that you can find ways to play it in most places, and because it's not it's not as mainstream as basketball, so the people who you find are tend to be like-minded, and you can have an instant group of friends. So my water polo girls from my London Otter water polo team to this day are still some of my best friends. So it was a great opportunity on the hotel side. It was also a great opportunity personally with water polo and getting to play. We would go to Hungary and Italy and play, and it was amazing experience overall.
Well, you mentioned that you realized that maybe you didn't want to stay in hotels while you were over there. So how did you get focused on professional sport? I don't think there's an algorithm for you to research like you did getting into Cornell. So how did you get focused on professional sport?
Yeah, and so basically my job that moved me and my now English husband back from England to the US was actually with Starwood Hotels, managing their loyalty program and the benefits and operations of that program. And so while I was there, I actually was contacted on LinkedIn by someone from the NBA asking me if I'd be interested in joining them. And I honestly thought it was a joke, because I love sports obviously, and but it wasn't. They were looking for someone who understood the principles of loyalty marketing, which so in my current role that will help explain it. But currently, the part of the business I support is our ticketing business. And so if you can move the season ticket member retention by just a couple percentage points, it equates to millions of dollars. So they brought me in to basically kind of take the principles of loyalty marketing that I'd learned through the hotel business and creating customer experiences, and help support our NBA, WNBA, and G League teams on incorporating those principles into their work. So that was my first role at the NBA in my department. And so now where I am is I oversee the support of all of our ticketing business. So ticket sales, premium sales, and then also our game experience. So the experience of coming to an arena, what's that like, what it's like from a service area. So that also has a very close tie to hotels.
So maybe take the viewers through a typical interaction with from your league office to the teams or a particular team about ticketing on the one hand and then in-game experience on the other.
Yeah, sure. So our department is called Team Marketing and Business Operations, and we are basically the in-house consulting firm for the NBA, and we act as liaisons between the league and our teams on a number of things. But every team, so every NBA team and WNBA team, they're their own separate business. So when I talk about impacting ticket sales, I can help create league programs and I can give advice. But at the end of the day, that's that ticketing leads business. And so on the typical way that we'd handle any sort of an interaction, there are two things that I really look for when I talk with teams. One is, what are the best practices here? Our whole department was built on the premise that you can compete on the court in every market, but there's no reason why a team in Miami and a team in Utah can't use some of the same like membership tactics or sales campaigns or things like that. It's two different markets. So one of the first things I do in the interaction is talk with them about their business, see what they're doing, what they feel is working, what's their recent sales campaign been, how are they working with their reps, what sales acceleration technology are they using, and then on the other hand, it's looking for the opportunities in their business that I can support. So is it that right now they have a gap in their group's business, catering to a certain audience, and then what can I bring either from another team, or is there something that we at the league can help support and build all together? So an example of something from like a league perspective that we could do to support is, there was a concept that started in the last few years around more flexible types of ticketing products. It's specifically geared more at, a Gen Z audience or a younger audience, but basically not everyone needs to be in the same seat for every game. And some people may rather, pay more like a monthly membership fee and their seat location changes every game. So from a league perspective, we found a vendor or a company who could support that. We worked with them to figure out what would be a great cost point and like cost break for our teams basically, and then presented that to teams so then teams could incorporate it. So that's kind of an example from the ticketing side. On the game experience side, the same principles of, these are the best practices that we can support, and helping and identifying how we can support you more through consultation. Those are still the same. And the big example actually on the game experience side that we brought to teams, and this was shortly after I started at the league 7 years ago, but one of the companies that does it best is Disney, right? They have tremendous service, and they are very good at catering their interactions, and we felt like there was a lot that our arenas could learn from Disney. So we worked with Disney, with the Disney Institute, to create a customized training program basically, and standards development program for all of our teams. So created that and then brought that to teams. And so some of the interactions therefore that we would have with teams are, we have this program for you. Do you want to put your team through it? At what level are you comfortable with investing in something like this? And what could the outcomes be?
All right. So as you mentioned, really at the start, we've going through this pandemic. I'm interested, and our viewers would be interested in, if it has affected your personal workload and what you do, and if so, how?
Absolutely. And it's funny because when you talked before about loss and recalling a loss, like when I think about, one of the big lessons that I took from that loss that we had and coming back and how to deal with it, I feel like that's something that's impacted how my team and myself have had to deal with the COVID situation, because we were actually on track to set another attendance record, another record sellout year. We put in all of these different platforms to support teams, and my team was hustling. Like my team was doing such a great job, and there were so many other people in the league that we were working with on things. And then because of COVID, everything came to a halt. So all of that work that we'd spent, the previous 6 months working on just couldn't be executed. And so had to allow ourselves like that moment to grieve, like I talked about. Like we had to be able to like sit for a moment and say, okay, you know what, like this is not the best situation, but we can come out of this. And so I mean, it's impacted my work significantly over the last several months, in part because at first there is uncertainty, but really just trying to figure out how can we make sure that our customers, that those ticket buying fans are still engaged with us. What can we do to show them that we value them? Like, how can we help them with things? So a lot of what our team's been doing has been supporting our teams in identifying what are those different touch points we can have with our fans. How can we make sure that we're still remaining in their minds, especially when basketball was going on in the summer, a time where people wouldn't normally think about it. So, you had people on my team that were helping support. I don't know if you watched any of the games that happened over the summer, but we had a virtual fan wall. Yeah, so the virtual fan wall, so someone on my team was helping liaise with all of the teams on making sure that that those people had good experiences and that they were seen. I was actually in it for a Raptors game, actually. I was on the wall for one of your home games.
Excellent.
Games, but yeah, so it's shifted. So I would say we were still focused on customer experience, but we were trying to figure out, how can we still create that engagement and create those connections in absence of basketball in your local market.
So you mentioned the Raptors for obvious reason. And so the question I have is, you got one team that doesn't reside in the United States, although it looks like it's going to for a while now. But are there any difficulties or changes or new approaches that you need to use, either specifically with the Raptors or because they're quote unquote a geographical outlier?
It's interesting because I feel like we don't really, in the normal course of business, we don't really realize, like, they're definitely Canada's team, but it doesn't necessarily like right now in the current situation, it's impacting things a little bit differently. But the bigger difference with the Raptors for me is just that they are part of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, which I love speaking with my friends from the Raptors because they bring to the table all this knowledge from TFC and from the Maple Leafs and all of their other sports properties. So I would say that's actually more of the difference, is that when I speak with them, I'm speaking with people who are, oversee a lot of different sports and entertainment entities. And so I learn a lot from them as a result. I love my friends at the Raptors.
So where does Nicole go from here?
Right now I just want to get through this next season. But no, everything's great. Like, honestly, I love the team that I work with right now. One thing being in my group at the NBA, one thing that's unique about it is our role is 100% focused on supporting teams. And it's funny, I feel like anybody that's played on a sports team who's been, a water polo player, especially if you're in a team sport, value that team environment. And it was funny because I was thinking about it coming into here. Like, one of my best friends in my department ran track. My boss played sprint football at Princeton. His boss played basketball at Stanford. Like, literally, our department has so many athletes in it, which I think really helps us in the way we work and the way that we approach things as a team. Everyone has their own role, and I think everyone is also very, very good at understanding how that role needs to change in specific circumstances. And everyone is just very singularly focused on the concept of team and making sure that we achieve our goals and achieve them together. So it's one of those things that when you've been around like several companies, and I love all the companies I've worked for, honestly, they've all been great. But being in an environment where everyone is super focused on coming together to achieve a goal is important. So we'll see. I love being in my department and at the NBA because of that. So it's a big unknown is what's next.
Okay. Well, we've talked about your collegiate water polo career a bit and your current career a bit. Can you speak a bit about how you feel that your college water polo career has impacted your working career?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in that concept I was just talking about with team and roles changing. I mean, one of the examples of when I came into Cornell, as I said, like the position I normally was already taken. Then the next year I shifted to being whole set. And then the next year when I was junior, there were these awesome freshmen that came in that were better. So then I shifted out. And then my senior year, I was doing I think I even played goalie for a game where we had 2 injured goalkeepers. So I think that whole aspect of being able to change your role and flex is definitely something that's come up over time and a big lesson that I've learned. I think also just the way that you support each other. There were definitely games where people were disappointed with their own individual performance, and you as a teammate are responsible for, coming over and helping that person and helping them understand, this is the big picture. This is, you did a great job, you failed, and maybe even share like some of the things that for the next time they want to do better. But that whole circle of how you support people, point out their strengths, but then also like push them to be their best and help coach them to a higher level. Those are all things that as a manager right now I have to do in order to help my team and lead my team appropriately. So all of those are lessons from water polo.
Well, have you ever found yourself in a situation in your working career where you stopped and said, I can draw from that, whatever that is, from my college career, and therefore I can solve this situation?
Yeah. So I mean, when I think about, the situations that I've been in, and like when I'm going back actually I'm sorry to do it again, to go back to when we lost to Collegiate my junior year. There were some things that specifically we could have done better. And the things that we could have done better weren't necessarily things that we actually weren't necessarily tactical. They were more foundational. So, I felt like not everyone on the team, including myself, necessarily had the same sprint ability. I felt like there were certain situations where, our passing was a little bit off our game. And so the idea of going back and then taking all of that, and then that was the focused work plan over the next year in order to come back and then end up doing well, was something that I could definitely draw from.
So a little bit of a zig to the side here. Oftentimes in interviews with people who are experienced, an interviewer will ask, so what would you tell your younger self? But I want to go at it the opposite way. I'd like to know what college water polo Nicole would tell working Nicole today.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think college Nicole might remind working Nicole that sometimes and I think this could go both ways actually, but sometimes you just have to bring a certain amount of confidence to a situation, and it's the almost like fake it to make it type of thing. I feel like when you go into a pool, and I'm not tall, I'm like 5'4", 5'5" maybe on a good day. And so it was one of those things that like when you go into the pool, or like when you're walking on the side, I would always try to make sure I was like standing up straight. I'm pretty muscular. So like, try to make sure that there's that certain factor, especially with teams that you don't know. And I think I would probably remind working Nicole that, sometimes it doesn't matter who you're going into a room with, but you need to kind of have that swagger sometimes, especially if you're trying to get people to buy into things that you're advising them of.
That's great. And finally, watching today in our viewership, there are high school water polo players looking at college along with their parents. There are current college water polo players who are looking towards careers after graduating. What pieces of advice would you give them about how a college water polo career can impact your ultimate working career?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is definitely to people in college, like I think sometimes as athletes, you know your game so well. Like we as water polo athletes train as water polo athletes for a number of years before going to college. And I think in a way, it kind of, because you're so focused on that and applying for jobs and then looking for things out there, at least when I was going through, I was kind of thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. Like I'm not trained, in how to do this specific job. But what I would say is just look at all of the attributes that you have and that water polo have given you on, how to work together, how to collaborate, how to really go for the win, and see how those can translate. I was on this call a couple weeks ago. The chief revenue officer for the Houston Rockets has kind of organized all of the all the women from NBA teams that are in revenue generating positions at a VP level or higher. And you know, it's a number that continues to grow. But it's funny because she asked on the call, and I think she was a swimmer somewhere, but she asked on the call and said, okay, how many of us on this call played sports in college? And literally 3/4 of the women on the call raised their hand. And it was one of those things where she did it. She said that because she raised the point. She said, you know, I always look for college athletes to try to recruit from, because even if they don't know sales, you know, even if they haven't practiced sales, they know how to grind it out. They know how to practice, and they know how to go for a win. And so it was an interesting thought. So I kind of would bring that to students who are looking at careers, to really think about that, think about everything that you can bring to it, and use that when you're interviewing as you know, an attribute. But yeah, and for high school students looking at colleges, I mean, I obviously picked my college there were only 2 choices at the time for what I could do. But I would say there, and this also applies to jobs, that sometimes what you don't expect can actually be the best thing for you. So I was not focused on going to school outside of the state of California. I really thought I was going to stay in California. But going to Cornell was one of the best things for me. It helped me branch out. I met people from all around the country, all around the world. And, you know, right now I'm living on the East Coast, would still love to get back to California eventually, but still living on the East Coast. So that turned out well. And so I would say, really don't look for the things that you think you'll find enjoyment in college, and let that kind of be the guide, I guess. And same thing for work. Find the things that you know you'll enjoy, and let that be the guide.
Very sage advice indeed. While she followed up her college water polo club career at Cornell by becoming an integral member of the NBA business team. Nicole Freeman Womack has been my guest today on CWPA Remote. Nicole, thanks so much for sharing your insights today.
Thanks so much.
Until next time on CWPA Remote, this is George Gross Jr. wishing all of our viewers the very best in and out of the water.